Hello, everyone, and welcome. I am here in our town hall with a couple of Arlington citizens who I will shortly introduce. We are going to have a conversation that is part of a series leading up to the legislative forum that is going to be taking place on Saturday, March 25th at First Parish Church in Arlington Center. The title of the forum is The Politics of Justice, and the issue is criminal justice reform. I am joined here today by Bill Gardiner, who is a member of the Mass Incarceration Working Group at the church, and by Colleen Kirby, who is also involved in organizing the event, but is in addition the criminal
justice reform specialist.
Thank you. The criminal justice reform specialist for the state group or the state level of the League of Women Voters. So thanks for that help in introducing you. And let's get the conversation started. I'd like to begin by just getting, kind of letting people know exactly what the event that we are talking about is going to comprise. And I'd like to start with just asking, why is it called a legislative forum? What is that?
Excellent. Well, we're trying to help people catch up around what's going on in the legislature around reforming our criminal justice system. And we have a mass incarceration working group at First Parish in Arlington that's co-sponsoring, has 25 co-sponsors for the event, so it's also a whole collaborative piece that's happening. And there has been some momentum around making important changes in our system, but it's been kind of on the shelf for about a year and a half as the leaders in the state, that would be Governor Baker and Representative DeLeo and Senator Rosenberg and Judge Gantz, came together and said, well, let's do some kind of a comprehensive criminal justice reform piece. And they called in the council on state governments to do that, and they came in and did thorough research, doing the best they could to gather information about the different programs and practices here in the state, what's working and what's not, and so on and so forth. So a lot of things were kind of on hold while that process was going on. But now the process has been complete, a report has been released. The governor has proposed some legislation that would deal especially with those going on probation and parole.
And it's very limited legislation.
Yeah. And so in the meantime, other legislators have been using this time to really think through and diagnose what are some of the potential pieces that might really make this even more significant. And that's what we're going to be bringing people to talk about. The CSG process, the Council on State Government process, and then some of this very imaginative, important legislation that some of our legislators are going to be bringing to the forum.
Right, and I know that there will be lawmakers present at the forum.
Yes.
At least in part, perhaps, to present themselves what it is that may be on the agenda, that we hope will be on the agenda in this legislative session coming up.
We're going to have Senator Will Brownsberger, who was a member of the Council on State Government, and we'll be talking about some of his proposals. We're going to have Senator Donnelly, who's working on pretrial reform and is very concerned about the care for mentally ill in our criminal justice system. Maybe they should be being cared for in different systems.
And he also has a bill on pretrial and bail reform.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. We're having Cassandra Ben-Assai from Ex-Prisoners for Community Advancement, talking about the Jobs Not Jails approach to things. Marion Ryan, our district attorney, is very interested and concerned about the process of what we call restorative justice practices. We also have a young man from the Teens Leading the Way, Idris Abdullah, and Rasan Hall from the ACLU, who's going to be looking at these issues in terms of the perspective of racial justice. So we've got an excellent panel. They'll be doing the presentations at the beginning of the meeting, and then we're going to have workshops with each one of them afterward for a more in-depth discussion about what they're working on, and some strategizing going forward as to how people can keep the momentum going, working with the legislators.
Yes, and so the focus is on legislation and various pieces of it, and then how, as a citizen, you can get involved to help try and move this legislation forward.
Okay, so there will be an informational component in that people
Yes.
will be hearing about what legislative ideas there are out there right now.
Exactly.
But then also a kind of not just aspirational, but creating some momentum for people to get involved as well.
Yes.
Exactly. We
And-
feel like, we've been waiting for this council and state governments thing, and people have been kind of, waiting on the shelf, if you will. And now that report's been released, and new legislation's being proposed, and now people need to get rallied around that and begin to really work with legislators to really try and get some of this through the legislature.
Mm-hmm. And I want to just follow up on something you said earlier, Colleen, which was that you said that what is right now on record as legislation that will go forward is relatively constrained, relatively
Yes.
narrow.
And that's because of the process. The Council of State Governments process is one where the Pew Research comes in. I mean, they funded the Council of State Governments to come in and do this study. But in order to do that, the four leaders of the state have to focus the study, and they focused it on lowering the rate of recidivism. So that already narrows the focus, because it's not talking about decreasing the number of people going into the system. It's about trying, once they're through the system, to keep them from going back in. And the other thing that's narrowing is that they had this group of 25 people that were the working group, and they have a consensus process. So everybody had to come to consensus in order to agree on the final bill that came out. So all of that meant it's a good bill, and it's one that more than likely will get passed because it has all of these people who've come together and come to agreement, but it is not comprehensive reform, and that's where all of the other bills, we're hoping that we can push forward many other pieces to make this a more comprehensive reform.
Okay, so just in the various issues that you guys have raised already in a few minutes of conversation, it's clear that there's a plethora of ways to tackle what is a situation that we all would like to see changed and improved. I would propose that for the purposes of structuring our conversation that I would let me ask you whether you think this is viable, that we divide those into three different areas. One, legislation or ideas that would work on reducing the number of people entering the penal system. One that would focus on the experience of people within prison, and one that would focus, as you already mentioned, on the issues of recidivism and what happens when people get out. Does that make sense?
I think that's an excellent way of thinking about it. That's the way we usually frame it ourselves.
Okay.
Going in, what happens inside, and what happens after people come out.
Great. So why don't we take it in that order, if that will work fine for you? And let me just throw it to the two of you. What are either a couple of ideas or the central issues, as you see them, in terms of reducing the overall prison population or creating alternatives to incarceration?
Well, let me take one step back and try and put the question into context.
Great, even better.
And that's because some people say, because the information is out there, that Massachusetts has the lowest incarceration rate of any state in our country. And so they say, maybe that's a good thing. Maybe we've already done what we need to do, and the only people who are in jail, well, in prison, in custody, I should say, are the bad ones. And that we don't
so in
need
other
to
words,
do
we're
anymore.
already doing a good enough job. Obviously, it's better than 49 other states in terms of in this way, so therefore.
Yes. So I wanted to put this in context. These red bars here This is the incarceration rate for all of the states in our country. And up at the top, this is the District of Columbia, and then we have Louisiana, and down here is Massachusetts. Yeah, so this is the bottom one, Massachusetts. So of all the states, we do have the lowest incarceration rate. But if you then put it in context of the entire world, these are all of the countries of the world, the incarceration rate. This is the United States. We're way up here. Massachusetts, even though it's the lowest of all the states, there are only 8 other countries that have a worse incarceration rate.
So we should I just want to clarify that if you're seeing viewers on the screen, this depiction, you'll see that the red stripes represent the states and the blue stripes represent countries.
Yes. And this is current data from 2016. And another way to put it is that the United States has 5% of the world's population, but we have 25% of all of the incarcerated people in the country, in the world.
Right,
And
so basically making the argument that you're the least bad apple in the biggest barrel of them is not a compelling case, right?
Yes,
From
and
our
I do not
perspective,
think we have the worst people in the entire world in terms of crime and viciousness. So we have a problem here that we need to fix. Now, how many people does this affect in the country? There are 2 million people that are incarcerated in the country, and a whole lot more of people who are under state control and parole or probation. So these are the 2 million people in the United States who are incarcerated. In the green, these are people who are incarcerated in state prisons. That's over 1 million people. These are the people who are held in jails and pre-trial. That's a little bit less than half. And this area that's the crosshatch, these are people who are being held pre-trial, which means they're people that have not yet been convicted of a crime. They're just awaiting trial. And this little piece, this crosshatch piece, this is what got me involved in this situation. Because as a person who is just a citizen, I am not a lawyer. I had no knowledge of this incarceration system, the criminal justice system in our country. And I found out through Senator Ken Donnelly, because he had a bill on pretrial and bail reform. And I found out that we have a large number of people who are being held in custody in our jails that are just awaiting prison. And I had always thought, awaiting trial, and I had always thought that you're innocent until proven guilty. I never imagined in a million years that we were holding people until trial. And these are not only people who are, these are not just violent criminals. These are a lot of people who just cannot afford to pay bail. We've done studies here in Massachusetts. In fact, Senator Barrett has a bill this year about fines and fees where we are actually holding people in jail as if it's a debtor's prison, which we thought we had gotten rid of many, many years ago, and that is still an issue today.
So just to put it in concrete terms then, the bail, changes to the bail system would be one way to address the number of people who are entering the penal system.
Definitely.
Yes. Yes, if there was a way to help, some states like Maryland and I'm not sure, but Maryland, they've gone to a complete no bail system, which means that because currently, if you have money, and you could be a drug trafficker and have high bail and get out. If you have no money, let's say you were on parole and you missed a parole meeting, and so then they charge you a fine, and you can't pay it, you end up going into jail. Even though you didn't do a crime, you just weren't able to meet your obligations. And so then you're sitting in jail and not helping society, helping yourself.
Yeah, so what happens to people when they end up in jail? They lose their jobs. They get disconnected from their families. Their children are around and about without the parental support and guidance they should be having.
Sometimes the children end up in foster care because their parents can no longer take care of them.
The state is paying thousands of dollars to keep that person in jail during that time. Is this really a productive way of approaching something, and which is so disruptive to the lives of people? And if they've lost their job, how is that benefiting them or benefiting any of the rest of the citizens in our state?
Yes, and I'm mindful of the graph that you showed earlier, which had the different distinctions or categories of people who are incarcerated, whether that's in federal prisons and state prisons that are in jail awaiting trials. That number doesn't include all of the people who are tangentially affected, but nonetheless extreme, at a societal cost. Children, spouses,
Families, communities.
dependents,
Yep.
communities, et cetera.
So
Yes, and specifically here in Massachusetts, we have about 20,000, over 20,000 people who are incarcerated, about half of them at the Department of Corrections, which is the state prison. The other half are in our local jails, which is a mix between the houses of correction, which is people who are serving 2.5 years or less, or people who are just awaiting trial. And so that's for a shorter period of time. And 1/4 of all of our people who are in custody, about 1/4, are those who are just awaiting trial, which I would like to see that decrease.
And just for clarification purposes, the 22,000 figure you just cited for the number of people who are in jail in Massachusetts, the figure you cited earlier when you said Massachusetts is doing better than the other 49 states, is that as a percentage of our total population?
Yes,
or is
that's
that
the
in
rate
absolute
of
numbers?
incarceration.
Got it.
It's not in specific numbers, that's the rate
So
of
the
incarceration.
22,000 is relatively small compared to the 6 million that we have living in Massachusetts, but it's a lot higher than it could be.
Yes, and also on the other hand, we actually have more individuals on probation. Our rate of probation and parole is higher than many other states. So we have a total of 90,000 individuals at any one time that are under state correctional control.
Okay, so that 22,000 figure needs to be seen within the context of a much larger figure
yes.
who are under control.
Yes, and then if you think about people who, even if they are no longer being supervised, they've done their time, they've done their probation and parole, and yet they end up with records. And those records follow them throughout their entire life. Even if they were falsely accused, found innocent of a crime, they still will have a record, and we have no mechanism for expunging those records, making them disappear. So just like when you have a problem with your driver's license, you mess up, you have some accidents, you can work that time off, and then your record is clean. That does not happen to our individuals who've been in custody. Their records can never be clean, even if they were falsely accused of a crime.
Mm-hmm. So another thing, another good example of people coming into the system really can start with the end of mental health institutions in the state, right? And the idea is that we're going to take people out of the institutions and put them in local community settings. Well, that was the theory, but then the dollars weren't there and the impetus wasn't there to make that happen. So then what happens to those folks and navigating their lives and interacting with other people, they're brought into the criminal justice system.
Yes.
Is that an effective strategy? Is that the best place for people who have those critical human needs to address those needs? And we think that that is far from the right way of doing things. And that's why we're very pleased that Senator Donnelly is asking the state to look at that and to propose new legislation so that if a person has real mental health issues and needs that support, they need to have that support in a different institutional structure, and the state needs to put resources into making that happen. That would also reduce the number of people coming into our so-called criminal justice system.
Yes, and that does tie into, I know you have something to add too, Colleen, excuse me, but it does tie into a recent conversation we also had with our Chief of Police, Frederick Ryan, who was detailing and describing the situation for Arlington police officers, happily for our community, where they have the option when they're trying to assess early on in an interaction whether there's criminal behavior taking place, and or that the relationship between that and mental health, and the opportunity to divert into a more productive channel those whose main issues seem to be of mental health, rather than sending them into the systems you were just describing.
Exactly.
Yes, and as Bill was mentioning, we did close down a lot of these facilities, and at the same time, this is a chart that I got from Senator Brownsberger's website. He looked at our rate of incarceration over time. And as you can see, back in the early 60s, we had our incarceration rate was much lower than it is now. The bar you need to look at is the green line. This is just looking at the state prison. And our incarceration rate has increased 5 times since the 1960s, and it went up and it stayed up. And right now, we're 5 times higher than we were in the 60s. Also, Mass Budget did a similar, they looked at both, this is looking at both state and the local jails, and they see a 3-fold increase since 1980. And some of that is because of the mental health issues, but it's also some of that is because of the war on drugs, which we've had. And so we've been incarcerating over time more and more individuals who have substance abuse issues. And if you talk to our sheriffs, to Sheriff Katujian, they will tell you that an awful lot of the people that they're housing have either mental health issues or substance abuse issues or a combination of both. And a lot of the crimes are based on supporting that habit and are not, and that we should probably be looking at this more as a health issue rather than as a criminal issue.
I think that's extremely important. I think one of the things that we who are citizens really need to be concerned about in our state is the numbers of people that are going in the system and the dollars that are required to keep those systems going. When we are having trouble educating our people, when we're having difficulties providing mental health support, when we have an opioid crisis, when we have schools that people need to be supporting and funding, that's where our dollars should be going. And the more that we put into incarcerating people is taking resources away from those critical needs.
Yeah, so clearly there are moral issues, there are equity issues, and there are also fiscal implications and ramifications of
the racial
current
disparity
system.
issues as well.
Yeah.
Because we find much larger number of individuals who are African American or Hispanic, and
Are in the system.
yes. This is a graph also done by the Prison Policy Institute, which is out in Northampton. They have a lot of statistics on their website about Massachusetts and other states. This is our population in Massachusetts based on race, and this is the rate of incarceration. So if this dot is lower, that means it's a lower rate of incarceration relative to the population. And as you can see, African American and Hispanic individuals are overrepresented in our prison system.
So lots, just to recap, some of what we've put on the table so far. In terms of the populations that are entering, the excessive, let us say, population entering the prison system, there are any number of things that can be done about that, from reform of bail rules or policies.
Yeah.
Restorative justice.
To alternatives.
Yeah.
Diversion.
Restorative justice and diversion are 2 programs we know about, again, from our conversations with Arlington officials. And then doing something about mandatory minimum sentences or
Yes.
other ways of
Yeah.
criminalizing what are perhaps better seen as health issues, or either health lifestyle or health
Support for drug addiction.
mental health and drug addiction, et cetera. So if we can now focus on ideas in legislation to address the deficiencies of the actual incarceration itself. One you've already mentioned clearly is the extremely high cost
Yep.
per inmate
Yep.
to society, which I have heard is $50,000 and up.
That's a number that we've
per
heard
year.
also. Yeah. So, one of the things that we've touched on is having people who are in the system who have drug addiction issues and that really should be addressed and get the help and care that they need to overcome their addiction. So that would be one whole piece. And
so introducing a therapeutic component within prison, within life in prison.
certainly for those who are in there who may have, serious crimes that they've done. But also keeping a whole bunch of people who have addiction issues out of the criminal justice system and addressing their issues in a different framework. And then, again, in terms of those who have mental health issues, creating resources for them outside of the criminal justice system, we think those are extremely important.
Yes, and one of the things that the CSG bill does address is the ability to take pretrial individuals and give them programming, whereas currently that's not part of the process. And so that hopefully would enable them to not have to sit in jail while they're waiting, but maybe they would be able to be availed of a program that might help their underlying issue, if it was mental health or substance abuse.
One of the things that I found instructive in learning about this is the country of Finland, because they had a very serious issue of incarceration themselves. And then some people said, no, we need to really do something about this. And so when somebody comes into the criminal justice system there, a lot of resources come into place. They get counseling, they get job training, they get opportunities to work in groups together and wrestle with their own personal issues, et cetera, et cetera. They get support for drug issues or mental health issues. A very intensive resourcing. And then as the person comes out, they are brought into housing, they're brought into an existing job that really enable, and the whole idea is, how can we help you become a productive, effective citizen again, okay? So when we look at our system here, the questions that we raise are, well, what is the resource allocation there, what's the goal there, and what are the results coming out? And one of the things that came out of the Council of State Governments report, which I found to be shocking, is that the recidivism rate was somewhere between 60 and 70% for people coming out of our system. So clearly we're doing something wrong, and I'm going to give the governor some credit for that's one of the areas that he wants to bring some focus to. And thinking back, what are the pieces that are going to be put in place to reduce that so that people can be successful coming out?
It's the situation you just described as it pertains in Finland is it really shows how stark the contrast is in the paradigms working in the two societies. In Finland, it seems to me that you've got the sense, manifest in so many ways as you described, that these are somebody who finds him or herself in this situation, they need more resources.
Yeah.
They need more of our attention.
Yeah.
We need to support them.
Yeah.
As and in so doing, we will truly have a better chance of rehabilitating them and making them, ensuring that the rest of their lives are, have a much better shot at being productive, et cetera.
Exactly.
And clearly that's in contrast to a situation here where most of the time we are focused on punishment and once they are adjudicated especially, and they disappear behind those, through that door and behind those walls, we don't want to think about them anymore.
Yes.
Right. And the thing is that over 90% of all of these individuals come back out into society. And how do we want them to come out? Do we want them to be productive members of society?
Exactly.
Or do we want to hit them with fines and fees and records that prevent them from getting jobs, prevent them from getting education, prevent them from getting student loans and housing? That does not make sense.
Right.
We want
So-
them to be full productive members of our society.
So again, just to refocus, so what can or should be done for individuals who are in prison during the time that they are in prison that can be done differently or should be done differently from what we're doing now in order to ensure a better result when they come out?
Yeah, so one of the bills talks about trying to get rid of mandatory minimums. It's a minimal bill because it's mainly just focused at nonviolent drug crimes. On principle, I think we should get rid of all of mandatory minimums. I agree with the Chief Justice, who's come out strongly in favor of that. One of the reasons is because if you have a mandatory minimum currently, then you cannot access programs because you have to spend, and you can't go out on work release because then you're not serving your mandatory time. And so the people who are serving time under mandatory minimums end up not getting programming. So that needs to change. That is one of the things in the Council of State Governments bill, which if it passes, it would change that somewhat. I don't think it will change it enough. I would like to see them gone and allow the judges to make their discretion because every case is an individual case.
And that's interesting what you just described, though, about mandatory minimums. The fact that it's not just a question of this person is going to jail without a judge being able to make any kind of individualized decision, which is something I think we're all familiar with. But then you also have described that the bad results from there, or the bad effects of that, will continue to linger during their time in jail because they do not qualify for the kinds of programs, or programs are not made for them that would help them again to have a greater chance of success back in the world when they get there.
Right.
So I think another critical piece is obviously job training, job skills, and so forth. But working in greater collaboration with the broader citizenry, with corporations and companies and small businesses who would make a commitment to working with people as they're coming out of our criminal justice system, so that there's a better connection there, so that the job skills that you're getting are actually going to be something that you can use in the real job market when you get out.
So training and programming,
And
whether it's...
the training that then connects you to jobs on the outside, I think one of the areas that's been successful has been in the food industry, food preparation. People get those skills inside, and some of those employees have been much more open to hiring people coming out of our criminal justice system to do those jobs. So there's been a nice connection there, but we could have more of that in other areas.
Anything else about the experience of being a prisoner?
Yes. Another concern is for individuals that are put into segregation, which we have what's called administrative segregation, and I forget the other.
You mean the solitary confinement?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, we call it
Something that's more
solitary
punitive,
confinement,
basically.
but they call it segregation in the state. And we do not have data on how many individuals are in that situation, but we do know that some people who are held in solitary or segregation, they may not end up getting put back into the general population and get programming before they are released to the street. And supposedly these are the most dangerous individuals, and yet they'll be sent to solitary and then come straight out back to society. That does not seem like a good idea. The other thing is that for the individual, this is especially a problem for the LGBT community, and because they are put into segregation for safety purposes.
Right, for their own safety.
For their own safety. But there's an organization, Black and Pink, which is very unhappy about this situation, which are their ex-prisoners who are of the community who feel that we need to change how we do this in Massachusetts to make it less, to have oversight, to have...
Right, because basically, again, it's the same issue as you were describing about hardened criminals or the worst felons who end up in solitary confinement, I'm just going to call it that, and then all of a sudden out in the world, even less prepared to deal with the challenges at that point. And then you also have an entire LGBT community, from what you described, who are marginalized in the same way.
Yes.
While incarcerated and coming out probably only worse off in terms of, you know, their ability to make their way in the world.
Yes, and we're one of only 3 states that allow you to be put into disciplinary segregation for 10 years. And the UN Council on Torture, they call it torture,
It's like the
UN
human right.
after 15 days, so that you should not have any segregation beyond 15 days. Now, how much that happens in our system, we don't know, because we don't have access to the data. So there is a good bill that one of the legislators is promoting to collect this data, and Pat Jalen has a bill to decrease the use of segregation and to make sure that there is oversight.
If there's a bill to, at least the idea of which is to make this data available, does that mean that the data is in fact available and we cannot access it? Or is it that they have not, you know, taken the steps to, and studied the issue to come up with the numbers?
That I'm not certain about. I mean, they do collect data. I've heard that there is data that we don't have access to, but it's possible that they haven't been
Very rigorous about.
keeping it. I mean, they definitely aren't making it public.
But this raises a very good point, because I think one of the things that came out of the council and state governments process, because they were going around, and we have 13 different districts, you know, with sheriffs and so forth, and they all had different ways of managing information. Some of them are really zero in, they've got very good information and data. Others do not. And so it really, from my point of view as an outsider going to their meetings, they're trying to develop state policy on what was very skewed information, okay? And hopefully one of the things that will come out of the reform that's going to happen is that they will make real attempts to create viable ways of getting good data in the state. How can you make good decisions about policies, about what you're doing, if you don't have the right information to make those from? And
Yeah.
I think it was pretty shocking, the absence of good data in the state about these issues.
Right, and also the obvious discrepancy or disparity between the ways that different sheriff's departments handle this
Absolutely.
information. You'd want to, ideally, you'd want a standardized system
Yeah.
that, you know, would apply to all, and so you could get that data you're talking about, and it would make sense within the context of all 13 entities.
Right, and it goes beyond the data. It also goes to what programs various sheriff's departments offer for their
Yeah.
individuals. And so, you know, if you're sentenced for the same crime but to a different jail, one person might have access to certain programs that another person does not. And this is something that needs to be addressed.
Now, we're very fortunate here in our area to have Sheriff Katusian, who's really doing some excellent work. And I'm hoping that you'll have a chance to interview with him as well for your
Yeah,
program.
we have spoken with the sheriff on various occasions, and this is another real good reason to do so.
Yeah, he's doing some really important things in our area, which are way ahead of a lot of these other districts. So we're very pleased.
Yeah, we're
with
lucky to be in the town of Arlington and in Middlesex County. There's no doubt about that. So let's just wrap up this particular part of the conversation. Is there anything else that we should mention about prison experience before we move on to the issues surrounding leaving prison and returning to society?
Yes, I have one more. This is a bill which has been put forward by Senator Brownsberger and, who was the other? Oh, Rep. Holmes. And this is the caretaker's bill because a large number of children have parents who are incarcerated, and there's been a lot of research showing that those children end up more likely to end up incarcerated when they grow up. And so this is a bill which would, if you're a primary caretaker of a child, that the judge should be able to look at your case and see, do you really have to be held in custody, or could you possibly be sent to a program or have custody at home and still take care of your children and be involved in their life? What would be best for the family? Is it better for them to have their parent at home, or is this parent a dangerous parent that, yes, needs to be locked up for the safety of society as well as their family?
Okay, and just to be perfectly clear, what that bill would seek to do is give a judge or some other oversight body the ability to look at an individual's circumstances. It wouldn't necessarily mean that everybody
Absolutely.
would qualify.
Absolutely, right. No, it would just give you the opportunity, if you were a primary caretaker and your crime was nonviolent.
Yeah.
It's only for nonviolent crime.
This would have a real impact on many women who are at MCI Framingham, who are disconnected
Exactly in that position.
Exactly in that position, disconnected from their families and the suffering in the families as a result of that. So we think this is extremely important.
Right, and we alluded earlier to the peripheral damage that can be done from from mass incarceration. This is hardly peripheral; it's very direct.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Well, with that, let us move on to the third and final phase that we have set out for ourselves, and that is, okay, what can we do about perhaps the most important aspect of this, which is, as you said, 90% of the folks who are in prison now will return to society at some point. We have to, for all of our sakes, make their prospects much brighter than they currently are.
Yes. Well, one positive thing I can bring up that I know that Sheriff Katujan is doing, and I don't know if any of the other sheriffs' counties are doing this, they make sure that on your release, they make sure that they sign you up for health insurance, because we provide such good health insurance in Massachusetts that it becomes possible. And so that way they will be able to get whatever treatment they may need. At least they'll have the ability to access it.
That clearly is. I mean, we haven't touched on too many sunny subjects today,
Yes.
understandably. So it is nice to feel like that, hopeful about that. What else needs to be done?
Well, we need to do the expungement.
Yeah. Say a little bit more about what that particularly means. So.
Yes, well, there's a few different bills, and one is for juveniles, and one is for people who've been falsely accused, and that there could be two different levels of falsely accused. You could be completely innocent of like the charges were dropped, but it's still, you went through arraignment, so it ends up on your record. Or you could have been charged with multiple things, and they dropped the higher charges, and you only ended up serving time or being punished for the lower charges, but those higher charges are still on your record. And so expungement would mean that not only would they have a mechanism to take it off your record after you've done your time, or for certain crimes, not for all crimes, but they also, currently, there's no mechanism in Massachusetts to expunge them at all, but also to get rid of it out of other databases like the FBI or housing databases or whatever
Credit
other
databases, yeah.
Yeah, so that there would be a mechanism to follow along and try and clear somebody's record so that they have a second chance at life, to have a clean record so that they can try and get a job.
So another very important one being proposed by Senator Brownsberger and Senator Barrett is around probation and parole fees. I don't know all the particulars around that because I don't know exactly how it works, but people find these to be very onerous. People don't often have a good cash flow and so forth. And
So these are fees that they have that are one-time fees when they are paroled or get probation, or they're kind of cyclical or
I believe they're monthly fees to help pay for the parole.
the administrative costs of their
Yes.
being.
with money that people don't have, and so that again puts them in a downward spiral. And I think senators are heading in the right direction to correct that way that's operating.
Okay.
Yes, Senator Brownsberger and our local rep, Dave Rogers, also have a bill on parole, which is trying to expand the parole board, because currently we do have a parole board, but very, very few people are getting parole. And there's a fear. It's hard, even though we have a board set up, they're afraid to make, sometimes they're not willing to make these decisions because they're afraid if they let someone out and something happens, oh, you made a bad decision. So they're trying to make it so that there's more of a rigorous data process saying that, oh, if you fit these criteria, you should get parole, unless we think you're, for some reason, specifically you, are not performing well. And so that way the people would get parole based more on analysis of data rather than making it a subjective decision of the parole board. And hopefully that would allow more people out on parole. The other idea is beyond, to expand the parole board is to add, because there's so many people with health issues and with substance abuse issues, to make sure that people sitting on the parole board have expertise in psychology, psychiatry, social work, because then they can help those people help the individuals develop a plan of what would be successful for them to get out.
Anything else that is, likely to come up at the forum as proposed legislation or currently in some form before the legislature?
Well, I think those are some of the significant pieces, but from our perspective as citizens who've been involved working on this, I think the main concern we have is keeping people out of the system, keep people from entering the system, because once they get in the system isn't necessarily going to treat them the best, give them the resources they need to move in a productive direction. They have these records that they're carrying with them when they're trying to get jobs or housing, trying to vote, et cetera, and so all of this has a terrible impact on people's lives. So everything that we can do to shift that and make that different is extremely important, which brings us to the Justice Reinvestment Act, which is kind of a comprehensive piece that includes bail reform and ending mandatory minimums and using restorative justice on the front end, and then taking, having good data that tells you what dollars you save there, and taking those dollars and putting them into a job creation trust, which then provides work opportunities and training opportunities in our communities that give people a different direction in their lives so that they're not on the edge of these systems.
Is that a piece of legislation that you were just citing?
It is a Senator
Chang
Diaz is one of the people that's proposing that, and that's a piece that has great support from a broad coalition called Jobs Not Jails, which is a broad coalition in the state that really wants to see that kind of a transformation. All the money going into the criminal justice system should be going into our communities. So.
Yeah, and that clearly does deal with in a holistic or comprehensive way
Exactly.
with a lot of the
Exactly.
issues that we've been talking about today.
Yep.
That's intriguing sounding. One hopes that it does continue forward with broad support and that we are talking about it as existing law in the not too distant future. I wanted to ask, and feel free to add anything about what we've already talked about. into your answer, but I wanted to now just return to where we began, which is the event on March 25th.
Yes.
So you have both, between the two of you, you have laid out a whole lot of ideas and bills in some stage of development that I assume will be presented, virtually all of them, on Saturday the 25th. Is part of the idea of the workshops that will happen after the panel presentations, is part of that trying to get a sense of where to, which of these bills to put the most emphasis on, or is it likely that they're all going to be moving forward and it's more a question of people becoming better informed about the things that they find most compelling? How will that work?
We've had some very interesting discussions in our own groups about how to approach this. And certainly one of the things is to identify those bills that have legs, that have a chance of passage if enough people organize around them and we have good people working inside the legislature to make them happen. So we definitely want to get online with that, and we think bail reform, mandatory minimums are ones that have that. The other thing is areas that we have moral passion about, but maybe not so much with what people are talking about in the legislature. And for us, one of the groups I'm working with, that's the whole issue of segregation, solitary confinement. We think that's an extremely moral issue, and the way people are treated in segregation is just a horrible thing. But we're not anticipating the legislature is going to do anything about that this year, and we just have to keep bringing that to the attention and trying to work within the system. We think a key in moving that is to actually go back and work with people in the criminal justice themselves who are working inside those prisons and those institutions who are responsibility to somehow connect with them for dialogue and conversation about what would work going forward. So we're committed to doing some work around that, but we're not anticipating that that's going to get through this legislature.
Yes, but each of the bills that we've mentioned today, they each have their own champions from various different legislators. And so we do think that there is a chance, because there was this delay for this big study. Now the study is done, and now people are ready and excited about trying to move this forward. We don't know which of the bills will move forward, but we are going to try and push on as many different directions as we can to try and get this. I think there's a synergy. Mm-hmm.
And I think we'll close today's conversation by just touching on something that it's hard to avoid, and that is, you mentioned that people had been kind of waiting for this study to be completed, and so you can tap into a certain kind of energy that's been pent up as you wait. Well, that reminds me of the energy that we all want to tap into as well, that is the result of the recent presidential election and the current political climate nationally, where people on the local level really feel like they want to get moving and doing something that they can have some control over and that can affect their lives directly. So let me just ask you, how do you see, we've been talking about not so much Arlington, but Massachusetts has been the scope of what we've been talking about. Do you think there's going to be any effect on the things that you're hoping to see happen from the either tone or policies that come out of Washington, D.C., or that we can anticipate coming out of Washington?
Well, this issue is more of an issue that affects us at a state level.
Yeah.
And so I think that there's a lot of energy out there. There are people who are crawling out of their woodwork who haven't been involved in issues in the past, who are chomping at the bit. I know of several groups that have recently started up here in Arlington and surrounding communities, some on this issue, some on others. So there is a lot of energy and more people who are willing to get involved because they realize that democracy is a process. And if you just wait and let other people...
kind of take the reins.
Yes, then it may not go the direction that you want to see it go in. On the other hand, we see that our current Attorney General is trying to change.
The federal Attorney General.
The federal Attorney General. Yes, Maura Healey is wonderful.
She's fantastic.
But the federal Attorney General is talking about law and order. We've known now it's that point of view has caused this increase in mass incarceration, and we have a much lower crime rate than we have in the last 30, 40 years, which is opposite to what our current president is saying. And so that is the wrong direction. And so we do need to be very clear that conversation doesn't change how we look at things. We need to move to the direction we've been heading in, which is a more holistic, health-focused humane issue, yes. But also treating like the opioid crisis, it's affecting more and more people in our state, and people are realizing you can't do a war on the opioid crisis. We can't just lock everybody up. That doesn't work. We've seen over the last 30, 40 years that doesn't work. And so I think that knowledge isn't going to change just because of the new Attorney General's viewpoint.
So we have a national crisis, obviously, with the new administration, and every day is a shock to me as to how it's unfolding. But I don't want to lose sight, as a citizen of Massachusetts, blue state Massachusetts, and we're reveling in our blueness, the incredible economic disparities that exist in Massachusetts. And the thing that just came out today about the economic disparities right here in Boston. The large numbers of people that are in our criminal justice system who don't need to be there. The fact that we don't have a really good minimum wage and the work to bring that into being. And then the work that people are doing around creating a tax on millionaires, which will bring more resources in for things. So there's a lot of work for us to do here in blue state Massachusetts to make things more equitable and help all of our citizens prosper and thrive.
And with that, I'd be tempted to close unless you guys have anything else that you wanted to add.
We certainly want to encourage people to come out to the meeting. We're expecting a very good turnout, and you can get more information on it on the website that you have here. So.
Right.
Yeah, and anyone that wants to get involved, just get in touch.
And part of the work we have to do here in Massachusetts, as Bill was just mentioning, can take the form of coming and participating in the legislative forum that we have been talking about. It will once again be on Saturday, March 25th at the First Parish Church right here in Arlington Center. And we hope as many people as possible will attend and will get involved. It is sure to be content rich, as this conversation has been. I want to thank our guests, Colleen and Bill, thank you very much. And we will continue the conversation leading up to and right in and through the event itself. Thanks for joining us for this conversation. We'll see you again sometime soon. I'm James Milan.